Hello and welcome to ATARC's webinar series. My name is Kirsten Patton and I'm the Working Group Program Manager here at ATARC, and I'll be emceeing today's summit. ATARC stands for the Advanced Technology Academic Research Center, and we are a nonprofit that facilitates collaboration between government, industry, and academia in order to support technology modernization initiatives. We provide ongoing opportunities for cross-agency collaboration, on-site interaction, learning, and market research. I would like to thank our partners over at Aqua Security, Tripwire, Yubico, and Armis for helping us create today's summit. And additionally, I would like to thank you all for joining us. We hope that you enjoy this informative session. I would also like to remind you that after each panel, there will be time for Q&A, so please place all of your questions in the Q&A box down below. And we will also be popping in a few poll questions as we go, so make sure that you answer those in order to ensure that you receive your CPE credit. Now, up first, I would like to introduce our visionary keynote, Chief Information Officer and Assistant Inspector General for Information Technology within the Office of the Inspector General at the Department of Health and Human Services, Jerry Karen. Jerry, over to you.
Hey, Kirsten, thanks for having me. Great to be here. I see there's a great lineup today. And of course, this is a very important subject. First of all, let me say happy Cybersecurity Month. Of course, hashtag Be Cyber Smart is the motto. And you know, just looking this week's topic, that DHS has different topics for each week, and this week's topic was phishing. And looking up, you know, phishing, you know, it's in 2020, you know, the FBI says it was recorded over twice as many incidents of phishing than any other type of computer crime. Looking at the news just in recent days, you know, there's been, you know, phishing attacks and attempts, blocking, you know, Google has blocked about 14,000 phishing emails from a certain government. You know, there's been some that have been phishing attacks with that have attacked and people have lost funds on. So, you know, it's cybersecurity is becoming much more prevalent, and we can tell that now. You know, after SolarWinds, everybody's like, oh, started getting, you know, cybersecurity started getting talked more and more about. Although we were talking about it a lot already, but even more heightened. So as a result, we have the executive order to improve the nation's cybersecurity that was signed early this year. If federal agencies have received memos around EDR recently, as well as logging, there is the Zero Trust Cybersecurity Strategy that was out for draft in public comment that OMB released. Now we have Zero Trust Security Architecture document out of NIST 800-207. So there's a lot going on around cybersecurity. And the great thing is I'm seeing more and more that people are coming together and really working together and networking around, especially around like just the subject of zero trust, which is absolutely great. But there's just more and more happening around cybersecurity, where you can see that, you know, there's more guidance, there's more direction coming out for specific things to be done. That cooperation, that networking has been great. I have the honor to co-chair the Zero Trust Working Group here at ATARC, which I am, you know, we started out, you know, after doing TIC 3.0, we started out with a group, grandfathered folks in. The group grew a little larger, and I am proud to say we have reached a major milestone of defining zero trust, the use cases around it, some of the concepts, definitions, terminology, and we have now 54 vendors, which I never imagined we would have that many vendors, but 54 vendors. We have about 20 or 5+ government agencies represented in some form or fashion, but we have 54 vendors that are now doing build outs of their labs to proof out against the use cases and information that we are requesting through live demos, which will actually start. First one will be tomorrow. and the next ones will be over the next few months. So that's a great milestone. And I must say, speaking of the cooperation, this working group started out earlier in the year and has just been moving forward to get to this point with great cooperation, great collaboration, both from the vendors, the government, lots of great information shared. And I know it's become of good use. I get feedback, become of good use, that information for people, one for TMF submissions and things like that. People have learned a lot. So anybody that's participated in that, I greatly thank you for making this a success and getting us to this point. But cybersecurity is definitely something that's on everybody's mind. Like I said, there's a lot of emphasis on it. I do believe that zero trust is the way to go. However, being a CIO, I also have to balance and do my mission. I can't just lock everything down the way I want. I have to be able to enable a mission. So a lot of times when I talk to people about zero trust, I talk to the folks that need to be on the team, and your user base has to be part of that team. You have to account for the mission while securing. When we talk about identity, it's the right information to the right people at the right time. Make sure that they are able to function and get to the data, because data is what we need to protect nowadays. That's what we're making decisions on. That's very important. Look at the recent news with the couple in Maryland, trying to sell submarine secrets, to foreign governments and getting caught. That information is the things that we have to protect. And, according to the article I saw, they were putting it on memory cards and trying to pass it off, within a peanut butter sandwich or something like that. So that technology is involved in some form or fashion, and they had access to certain information. And we need to be ensure that that information is protected, our government secrets and things like that. So I know you'll hear a lot of great things today from the lineup that ATARC's put together. I know there's another summit around zero trust next month that I'm really looking forward to as well. We have the demos going on with our zero trust working group. We'll start tomorrow at 11, and you can go to the ATARC.org website and find out about that and how you can get invites to see those demos. Like I said, they'll be going over the next months. So definitely, I appreciate everybody's attention. We are here to better and secure the nation's cybersecurity information as best we can. And so we all have to work together at doing that. So I really suggest getting involved in some of these working groups. There are other working groups as well to get involved in that are really, that cooperation and that networking are very important, because we're all trying to do the same thing at the end of the day. Lots of solutions out there. And the technology part is easy, but sometimes it's the people in politics that we have to deal with. So we need to roll up our sleeves and address that as well as we go forward. And a lot of people are already blazing paths in certain areas. So reach out if you know somebody, and start getting involved and start networking and sharing your ideas and getting ideas from others. I think it's really important, because like I said, we're all in this together. With that, Kirsten, I will pass it back to you and look forward to the rest of the day.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Up next, we will be hearing from our emerging technology talk, Jesse McDermott. Jesse is a solutions architect over at Aqua Solutions. So Jesse, over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Let me just grab these slides. Hi, everyone. My name is Jesse McDermott. I am the solutions architect here at Aqua Security. I'm going to just be grabbing this PowerPoint, making it full screen. All right, we can just do it from here. Sorry, guys. So first off, the 3 pillars of cybersecurity. Those 3 pillars are going to be our build, infrastructure, and workloads. Now, when it comes down to these 3 pillars, they do relate back to their own cybersecurity practice in the market. build being DevSecOps, infrastructure being CSPM, and workloads being CWPP. Now, when it comes to the build, every company is going to have their developers creating these cloud native applications. And they're not always considering how important security is at the beginning. They might not always be looking for those early risks, fixing things early on, keeping track of it. And it's important to get those risks figured out as early as possible, because the sooner it's handled, the sooner we can move on. Next up would be that infrastructure. So as you are running these cloud native applications, whether they're public or private on the cloud, Google, Azure, AWS, whatever it is, you want to ensure that you still have security and protection over there, because you're only as secure as your infrastructure. I always like to say it's like locking your bedroom door, but not your front door. You're not as secure as you may think you are. Now, when it comes to the workloads, you are running these cloud native applications. You want to be able to monitor them in runtime, so that way you are aware of any changes being made, things that may be affected by those attempts, stuff like that. So that way you can feel very secure the whole time. You know what I mean? You're going to know what's going on all the time. Now, this next slide is going to be a really basic look at a cloud native application lifecycle. And if we keep in mind those 3 pillars moving forward through this lifecycle, we can secure a lot better. Now, starting off right here, we have our build. So we want to start here with scanning for risks. You scan for your risks, you're going to take them and prioritize them, see what's most detrimental to the environment, advise on how to fix them, and then that actual process of fixing them. This right here is a reoccurring cycle. So, as you're adding to your workloads, as you're changing things, you want to ensure you're constantly scanning, prioritizing, advising, and fixing. Now, this visibility, again, does translate over to infrastructure, because again, you're only as secure as your infrastructure. So over there, we still have that visibility and that ability to detect threats. Now, the next slide is going to be an example of that risk prioritization. Right here, we have our risk-based insights page. This is essentially going to take all the vulnerabilities within your environment and apply some filters to them to help you decide, where is it best that I spend my time? How can I, as quickly as possible, secure my environment, right off the bat? So some things you can see, you could have anything with an exploit that's available, exploitable workloads. And again, this is just going to help you determine, hey, I need to really put some time and effort fixing over here to really secure the environment. Now, this next slide says 2 types of risks. So when I said we scan, we have 2 different types of scans we do. We have a static scan and a behavioral analysis. With our static scan, you're going to get that CVE information, a link to the National Vulnerability Database, any information that could help you, figure out this potential risk and, handle it accordingly. Whereas with our behavioral analysis, you're going to get the actual behaviors of that containered workload, what it was doing at those moments. And again, it's just going to give you a different type of information right there to then help, prioritize and advise and fix. Now, the next part of this is going to be our acceptance gate. And it's as simple as just stating, what do we know about this container, about this information? Is it known? Is it expected? Is it meant to be here? Who is it that deployed it? Is it compliant with the policies we set in place? Stuff like that, that's going to ensure that we have all the information we need to know about this containered image to then move forward in a safe manner. And because of this policy-based approach, it's also going to allow us to, again, just mitigate all those issues early on as possible and prevent them from going into runtime. Now, last up will be the workload and infrastructure protection. Once we go through that acceptance gate, we're going to be pushing into runtime. And then we come back over to that visibility we talked about. The visibility and that ability to detect threats has now also become behavioral drift and response time. So now going to our next slide, we can see some of those workload protection controls we have in there. We can see we can block access to running workloads. We can block modification to running workloads, prevent someone from living off the land, risk fallout, things like that. To go into a little bit more detail for it, with that drift prevention we'd mentioned, we're going to be able to tell if anything's changed. It's going to be able to prevent executables that aren't in the original form from running. Preventing those zero-day attacks. If someone's, somehow in your container attempting to make changes, it's going to be able to prevent that right then and there. And again, just ensure that you are protected at all times. Maybe you're taking a nap, maybe you're walking your dog, whatever it is, we're going to be able to prevent those drifts very easily. Now, another great one to talk about would be allowing and blocking specific executables. So again, some automated profiling and policy creation, mitigating the bloat for deployed images. Just another great way then to continue to help take those 3 pillars into account when it comes to securing your environments. Now, this last slide right here, the last 2 slides, this one right here, addressing the top risks in the container environments, rogue deployment, continuous discovery and acceptance for those supply chain attacks, static and dynamic analysis of images like we discussed, attackers living off the land, being able to limit those users or that executable use, for any of your credentials, being able to have those secured secrets, a lot of information like that. And then this last image right here is just the Aqua platform. You can see, again, we have those build, infrastructure, and workload sections, all that information within there. Everything in blue is what Aqua brings to the table, whereas things on the outside or third parties that we can use, we can integrate with no issue, any CI/CD secrets, orchestration platforms, things like that. Thank you so much for letting me give this talk. If you have any other questions about Aqua, please go to aquasec.com.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Of course.
Okay, so up next, we'll be hearing from Tim Erlin. Tim is the VP of Strategy over at Tripwire. So Tim, please take it away. There we go.
Hi, I'm Tim Erlin, Vice President of Product Management and Strategy at Tripwire, and I'm here to talk about the 7 habits that make up a highly effective vulnerability management program. So let's get right to those 7 habits. The first one is executive buy-in. Now, it may seem like executive buy-in is sort of a gimme in this context, but I have seen a lot of vulnerability management programs ultimately fail because they didn't really have executive buy-in. So what does that mean? It means that the success or failure of that program is actually material. It matters to those executives, not just lip service, but that it affects their success or failure in some way. So if you can't figure out how your vulnerability management program impacts those executives, you probably don't have executive buy-in. The second habit that I see in organizations is asset discovery. So vulnerability management begins with understanding what's in your environment, because those are the assets in which you have to find those vulnerabilities. I've seen a lot of organizations that roll out a VM program, but they continually find exceptions or areas that they don't know what the assets are, where they're missing information about what they're actually trying to protect. So if you don't start with asset discovery, then you're not going to build a highly effective vulnerability management program. The third habit is scan frequency. Now you might think that scan frequency means scanning as often as you possibly can, but it's important that that scan frequency actually be rational rather than just as frequent as possible. And when I say rational, what I mean is that it be tied to the remediation activities that are going on in your organization as well. Scanning more frequently might not make any difference if your remediation cycle is much slower. So you want to have that rational connection between the frequency at which you're assessing those assets and the frequency at which you're actually remediating them. And then the fourth habit is incorporating business context. All assets are not created equal in an environment. So if you can't identify which assets are important to the business when you're performing vulnerability assessment, then you can't really manage those vulnerabilities effectively. You're simply assessing them, you're not managing them. So business context includes how important that asset is. It also includes what systems that asset participates in and how important those systems are to the business. So that's an important aspect, an important habit that I see in highly effective vulnerability management programs. The next habit is that exceptions are the exception. So what does that mean? In many environments, there are some assets that you can't effectively scan for vulnerabilities. Maybe they're old, maybe they fall over, maybe they're sensitive. Maybe the business unit simply doesn't accept that process. Maybe they're part of an industrial control system. But in organizations that have a highly effective vulnerability management program, those kinds of exceptions are really the exception. The more of that surface area that you exclude from vulnerability scanning, the more of that surface area you don't understand the risk on, and you're missing that information. So that's important. And then the sixth habit I see in organizations is managing to metrics. It's very easy with vulnerabilities to think that finding more is better and think that simply fixing more is better as well. But if you don't actually understand what metrics around vulnerabilities matter to your business, how your business operates, and if you're not tracking metrics other than simply how many vulnerabilities did we find or how many did we fix, then you're not really measuring if you're reducing risk effectively or not. So organizations that have highly effective vulnerability management programs tend to identify a set of metrics that make sense to the business, that motivate the right kinds of behavior in terms of remediation activity, and then use those metrics as management tools. And then finally, the seventh habit that I see for highly effective vulnerability management programs is an attachment or a connection to remediation workflow. There are many vulnerability management programs that I will call vulnerability assessment programs in these cases, where scans are run, vulnerabilities are found, they're handed off to other groups, but nothing really happens with those vulnerabilities. Nobody really fixes them effectively. Any risk mitigation is incidental. If your vulnerability scanning and vulnerability assessment isn't connected to a remediation workflow or a remediation process, you're not effectively managing those vulnerabilities. And there's no one size fits all for remediation. Organizations get work done differently. And so for you to connect your vulnerability assessment to that remediation workflow, you have to understand how your organization gets work done. And that kind of a connection is the last of the 7 habits that I see in highly effective vulnerability management.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Tim. Up next, we have our first panel discussion of the day, which will be moderated by the reporter over at Federal News Network, Jory Heckman. Jory, over to you.
Thank you, Kirsten. And before I begin, I just want to encourage the audience to get questions rolling in here throughout the conversation. The time always goes by so much faster than you think it will. And, I want it to be an organic conversation that we weave these comments through the conversation, in its entirety here. And other than that, happy Cybersecurity Awareness Month. I believe everyone's aware at this point, but, it's good to celebrate. And, that being said, we'll have some poll questions going through the conversation here as well. So, be on alert for those, and we'll also make that part of the conversation too. And so without any further ado here, I would like to introduce our 2 panelists here for our fireside chat here. And if you could just please give us a wave when I call your name here. We have Robert Wood, who is the Chief Information Security Officer at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, as well as the Director of Information Security and as well as its Director of its Information Security and Privacy Group, and Devon Tyler, who is the CISO over at the U.S. Mint. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us this morning here, and there is plenty to talk about in Cybersecurity Month, Awareness Month. I think just give us a more fulsome introduction of yourselves and maybe to kind of get the conversation rolling here. What is currently front of mind for you as CISOs at your respective agencies when it comes to cybersecurity? What are the emerging trends and what keeps you up at night, so to speak?
Yeah. You guys hear me okay?
Can hear you great.
Loud and clear.
What a background.
Oh yeah, I've got toddlers running around upstairs. Some kind of ritual or something. So there's a lot of stuff that are that's top of mind for me. But if I had to pick one thing that kind of rises above the rest, it is how we as a security team help other teams move faster. Sort of circling everything back to that enablement mission. So, there's a lot of process in our particular agency that is so heavily sort of oriented around big, slow moving, de-risking process. Your ATOs, your privacy impact assessments, your controls assessments, your FedRAMP, all of that stuff, and it all slows down delivery of mission in a way. And so we are intensely focused right now and a number of different areas on how we reduce burden for teams. And that is probably the thing that is like keeping us like really excited, really engaged, really motivated.
All right, very good. So balancing that that ease of access with cybersecurity, the age-old tension there. And Devon, same question for you. Give us a better introduction of what you do over at the U.S. Mint and what's top of mind for you these days.
Hey, thanks. And I think Rob had said it perfectly: innovation, integration, and just helping to move things forward. So again, I'm Devon Tyler. I'm at the U.S. Mint. I've been here for roughly a year now, about a week left, and I've been here for a year. I spent most of my career in the Department of Defense for an agency called DISA, where I ran perimeter defense and cybersecurity over there. So I'm happy to be over here at the Treasury and kind of supporting the same mission, but a little bit more. What keeps me up at night, there's a lot of things that keep me up at this point. But a lot of it is just trying to make sure that the security tools that we have are properly harmonized, properly used, and then rolled out. That starts to give us, more credibility into what we're doing. And then the other piece, what we're working on now, I think, just like other agencies, a lot of it is the executive order and making sure that we really chart a course towards success and that everybody understands what success looks like. So I'm spending a lot of time, talking to other divisions, other departments about the federal executive order and making sure they understand what success looks like as we chart the course together, and making sure it's just not, my division ISD is not just an ISD thing, but it's a Mint initiative that everybody understands. So it's been an interesting journey to get everyone up to speed. But I do agree with Rob, making sure that everybody understands that we're not just compliance based and that we're enablers and we're integrated with the mission, helping enabling the mission more so and less so of a force to stop the mission. So thank you.
Yeah, it's never just check the box, is it?
Yeah.
And I think that you bring up a really great point that I think is a good way to kick off the conversation here. Is that cybersecurity executive order? It's really on everyone's minds these days, and there are so many rolling deadlines. But it really sets the tone, at least from my perspective, on what the administration is looking for cybersecurity for the coming years here. With that in mind, are there any specific elements of that executive order that has forced you or had you reassess or elevate or reshape your cyber strategies at your agencies? And if you could give us maybe some examples there, I think that would really kind of help us all better understand how we're trying to get our arms around this EO.
Yeah, for me, a lot of it is zero trust, and we have some initiatives that were underway prior to the executive order that were just subsets of zero trust. So it's really taking that zero trust, I would say, cake, dissecting that cake into pieces and making sure that everybody understands what piece they own or they may support. And that takes a little bit because zero trust, as you know, is still a new term, is a fairly new term in the cybersecurity world. And if you're an operator or integrator or application developer, it's something that's totally new. You might not have heard that before. So it's taking that new concept, making sure that people that are not cybersecurity people, but are involved in cybersecurity, properly understand it, and then dissecting it, and then making sure that there's, it did a great job showing the pillars, and make sure everyone understands the pillars and what we're actually going to do. And again, I think it's great. It's a timeline that we've been given, so we're working backwards towards that timeline and see how we can support it. But we spent at Mint probably the last 3 or 4 months reaching out to Treasury partners at DISA, just to properly understand it and educate the entire staff. So I think that's been the first critical piece, is that education piece. And then the last piece of it is that formulation of the plan. So a lot of work that still needs to happen. But it's been interesting. It's an interesting journey. And I think it is good to give us a roadmap of where we need to get to.
All right, thanks for that, Devon. And Robert, same question for you. What's really kind of changed or moved the needle in the past couple of months with the cyber EO?
So, I mean, zero trust is a big one only because it's so sprawling. Similar to Devon, we had a number of initiatives underway that were in support of it. It's not like we're going 0 to 60 or just starting the journey. because it's not this binary thing that is, you're either zero trust or you're not. So I mean, that's interesting. It's prompted a lot of really good conversations and new procurements, new projects, new direction changes, juice for the security team to kind of point back to and say, like, this has come down from the White House. The entire industry is rallying around this, and so we need, like, this is the direction we need to go. The thing that is most interesting for me on a personal level, though, is the emphasis on software security. So, so much of the compliance landscape is centered on systems and network security. So it's, how are you handling your patching? What does your networking look like? How are you logging into stuff, and how are you logging it? All of that stuff. And the world that I've come from prior to ending up at CMS has been almost all, well, not all, but heavily skewed in the direction of software security. Working in a lot of tech companies, and so things like the software bill of materials emphasis, things like secure adoption of cloud services, stuff like that is really interesting to me, because I think it's, if you think about like a very simple representation of a technology stack for a piece of software, like networks and hosts and databases, like those are all part of it, but there's this thing on top that is that's open source libraries, that's custom code, that's development frameworks and build environments, and then there's the users on top of that that are consuming the thing or administering the thing or whatever it is. And if you're just kind of neglecting like a whole set of layers in that stack, then then you have tremendous risk. And looking at a lot of data breaches that happen just around the world, you see things like let's say unpatched open source libraries. You see things like your injection attacks. These are software issues, and if we don't tackle them with a software security sort of approach and mindset and bring those kind of capability, like, you're not going to patch software with a Nessus scan. You're not going to harden your software or your library nested and transitive dependencies with database controls. It's just like the two things are not congruous. And so the emphasis on that in the executive order was very exciting to me, because I think it helps round out this very important part of our overall risk posture.
Yeah, that's a real good point there, Robert. And I would say within the past year or so, the way that we look at the threat landscape, the way we look at the equation of what needs to get defended, perimeter security is certainly not an acceptable way to just boil it all down to. There's much more to it. And case in point with the SBOM, the software bill of materials, for sure, with the cybersecurity EO. And I think to maybe pivot the conversation along that way, that attack surface area is for sure looking a lot different these days. And, that can be any number of things. That can be, the Internet of Things. A lot of different endpoint devices are connected to those agency networks. And it can be an opportunity, of course, for the mission side of the agency, but can also be a challenge on the cybersecurity side of things. And so whether it's IoT, whether it's compute at the edge, whatever you want to call it, how do you reconcile those kinds of challenges? How do you discover devices on the network, and how do you ultimately secure everything? I'll throw it out to whoever wants to take a first crack at it.
Yeah, I can take a stab at that. So I think it part of this is dependent on like knowing your organization type. Like if you're a hospital, for example, you might have a lot of those IoT devices or manufacturing or something like that. You might have you're going to have a higher density of certain device types to run the kind of business or mission that you have. At CMS, like, we don't have a lot of that, like that kind of footprint. And so, doing asset management and asset discovery and such along those lines is not as important, but it is much more important for other types of, your endpoints, your servers, your APIs, databases, where data, like data inventory management, that kind of stuff is very important in our particular ecosystem. And so a big part of this, in my opinion, is about IT leadership understanding, like having a real good understanding of like what makes their organization tick, and then aligning their strategies, their approaches to support their strategy with what drives the organization. And like you have to kind of understand the makeup. Like you're not gonna if you want to like go off-roading, you're not going to bring your sports car. You're going to bring your Jeep. And vice versa, if you're going to race somebody, you're going to bring your sports car, not your Jeep. And so like you have to kind of adapt your blueprint, your approach to what is what you're kind of dealing with. And as far as, well, actually, I don't want to take up too much time with that answer, so I'm gonna go over at that point.
All right, and Devon, we'll throw it over to you.
Hey, no problem. Yeah, Rob, he's still in the thunder. There's some great points over there. I would say from a member perspective, integration, CNDB is a thing, but integration of the NOCs and the SOCs, and of course, discovery tools, as Rob kind of mentioned out there too, but having operations, not just security operations, but network operations in harmony to understand when things are being deployed, tracking when anomalies are happening, to have that reporting on back to the NOC. Hey, are you tracking as it's something new? It's critical as you discover those things. IoT is something that is not new, but something that we're seeing that meant more and more in the enterprise, and we're having to pivot and discover and make sure that we have software that can support. Mint's also heavily in manufacturing, so we also have to make sure that we support the OT environment. There's a lot of OT technology that we have that we currently support, and making sure that we have from a cyber perspective. I think the EO I think Rob kind of mentioned the software piece. For us, it was critical to see the ICS environment inside of the actual executive order, to make sure it's critical that we not just worry about the IT, but the OT has a focus. I think we've seen this year a bunch of new attacks in the OT environment. And one of those things that constantly is on my mind, are we going to be subject to that? What can we do to protect? And it's something that I think, as we all know, you can never be perfect, but you have to continue to move forward and make sure that you have plans and everyone's tracking, and at least you have some type of destination that you want to go to. Again, I back to your original question, what are we doing? Again, there's a bunch of software from CDM that we're leveraging, NAC. One of the focuses that I had when I got at Mint was integration of tools and complete configuration of tools. So taking what we already have, and I like to say, here's your dinner in front of you, and that's our cyber tools, and making sure that we properly, ingest that dinner, and that leadership understands what those current tools are doing before we go out there and start to look at other cyber investments and things that we can do additionally, because there's a bunch of things that we already have that could be doing a job, and we just have to properly configure and assess those tools and then make decisions moving forward. So hopefully in a nutshell, that kind of answers your question.
Yeah, I just want to like plus one all of everything Devon just said about like getting the most out of what you're using. So, I think there is a tendency in our field and, in organizations in general to just always be adding more stuff to like, oh, we got another problem to solve. We better go buy another gadget to do it. And, that's not always going to get you to where you need to go. Like you might already have the data that you need. You might, like less can sometimes be more. And so like a useful exercise, along the same lines that, Devon mentioned at the top of this, like mapping all the things that you're doing and trying to get the most out of it and integrate it and such. We went through an exercise, and we continue to go through it on an ongoing basis of mapping technology purchases and tools we rely on and such to this tool that Sunil Yu put out called the Cyber Defense Matrix or Cyber Defense Framework. One of those. Google it, you'll find it. And it's effectively like an asset class and NIST CSF grid. And we blew it up a little bit to sort of expand on what it means to be like a network or an app. And because there's, you might have software as a service, you might have custom apps, you might have COTS products that you're installing. And but understanding like how, if we have a particular technology, CrowdStrike, for example, just picking a random security tool out of the fold, like, vendors will sort of drive home the point, like, we can solve all of these crazy problems for you, but like having a good mapping to sort of cut through all that chaff of, here's what it actually covers, here's the asset classes it actually covers, and here's what it, it might just help us on detection. All right, so there's still, identify, like asset identification, there's still asset hardening, there's still incident response, and there's still recovery. There's still a lot more stuff that might come into play. And so I'd recommend checking, like, in the interest of everything Devon said, which is, which was beautifully stated, to like go through that exercise as an organization and figure out like what you're using and how it maps, and be conservative and instead of optimistic. And I think you'll find that like either you have a lot more than you might think, and you can start to prune things down, or you have blind spots, and that's where you should reinvest.
Hey, Rob, one more point to add on to. I remember first job as a manager, and then hearing the term as we're starting to go into our investment portfolio when I was in the Department of Defense, and started hearing how derogatory the term was, defense in depth, because it was leveraged to overspend. I mean, you would say, I need more. Well, when is depth stopped? And that's one of the things that we had to really pause and figure out and go,
100%.
What's the right amount of security? And that's the hard question.
Yeah,
it's so hard.
Yeah, that's a tough question to answer. And it's an answer that always changes, I imagine. Changing gears here a little bit. Some of our eagle-eared listeners here were saw that Robert, your background really mentions DevSecOps here, and could you give us a little bit better of an explanation of how HHS and CMS in particular is approaching DevSecOps?
Yeah, well, like many things, it's a multifaceted strategy. But for this effort in particular, what you see kind of highlighted here, this is, we're sort of doing internal promotion and such of this particular program. And really, what we're aiming to do is build on the success of CMS's cloud migration, cloud adoption strategy, and shift towards declarative state. And what I mean by declarative state is it is the state of your environment, the state of the pipeline that builds your environment and builds your code, the source and supply chain of all that stuff is all or maximally built into code. And so you're interfacing with an environment, with a system in a more GitOps oriented way, as opposed to people just logging into stuff, manually moving build artifacts around, things like that. And so really it's about moving more state into the code base. And when it's in the code base, we can write tests for it. We can lint for it. We can build release gates for it. All of that stuff that helps us push compliance down into the code base. And if it's in the code base, it can be inferred automatically if you're running a thing that was derived from the code base. And it can be just done automatically instead of having humans go back and sort of check scanning tools and running, run tools to get artifacts and look at reports and then read and write reports. Like, all of that stuff takes a lot of time, and it harkens back to that first thing that I mentioned around mission enablement, and like the thing that is just one of the most important areas for me personally. Oh, and I saw another question come up along SBOM in the Q&A. I can jump in on that. So we are looking at so in the executive order, it talks about requiring SBOMs. There's actually a great interview that Alan Friedman participated in. It's on LinkedIn somewhere. It was just like 2 days ago, talking about this. And there's all of this. There's a lot of pushback that we see from tech vendors around the like producing SBOMs for as part of procurement. They're not sure what we're going to do with them. Why is it actually necessary? Yes, it says this thing. Do you how are you going to hold us accountable to it? And so we are starting to lay groundwork for how we ingest Cyclone DX, which are the more security oriented SBOM standard into our like data ecosystem, so that we can start so that we can start actually incorporating it into like the asset visibility functions that programs like CDM are and were intended to drive. CDM, I believe in the spirit of it, it's not just about like what assets are running on your environment, but like what is your asset or what is your environment actually made of at any given point in time. And if we consider third-party technology, third and fourth party technologies, SBOMs help sort of create that like that footprint or that fingerprint of like what that thing is made of. And that and honestly, we should extend that same sort of practice to our own custom code, producing SBOMs to our own stuff. So that way we just know like what makes up everything that is running in production right now that's driving our mission and touching our data and dealing with our users. Right now, I don't think many organizations could answer that question in in the truest sense of like how one might want to answer it. And like that's the path that we are on, and we are focused on the Cyclone DX standard in particular at CMS. Hope that answers the question.
All right, very good. Thanks for picking up that question there, Robert. And Devon, don't want to leave you out here of the conversation. As far as DevSecOps and the journey that Mint may or may not be going on, is that a going concern for the Mint? And if so, maybe give us a better understanding of maybe some of the highlights of what DevSecOps means for the U.S. Mint.
Yeah, I would say for the Mint, we're new when it comes to that journey, probably not as far as CMS, but we're mostly a COTS agency. We tend to buy from commercial support. We do have instances of applications that were traditionally, developed using a waterfall model. Now we're bringing them over to DevSecOps. I think Robbie kind of had a lot of points on why that's critical, but from a size portion, we have a very small amount of applications that would actually go through it. We have made investments in software to help us integrate the security with the development of applications, and we're now going through the pipeline of getting everybody trained up and skilled up to kind of support that instance. So again, very small at the Mint, but it's something that we're looking at.
All right, very good. And I think it's time for us to throw up our first poll question here. Alyssa, if you could get that ready for our audience here. We'll just give everyone a second to fill this out here, and then we'll look at the results.
Is that for us as the speakers?
I think it's entirely optional for us, but
Okay.
I don't think there's anything against filling it out if you feel like it.
I don't know, my mouse is acting funny. That's the only reason I ask.
It's okay. We won't be frozen here forever.
Okay, good.
All right, see what we got here. How familiar are you with your agency strategies for discovering devices, tracking behavior, detecting threats, and taking action to protect their enterprise? Most of you said moderately familiar. Okay, all right, good to see that there. And I think with that in mind, let's maybe take it another direction here with the audience questions. The cybersecurity skills of your workforce. I think we kind of set the tone early in the conversation that this, cybersecurity is everyone's responsibility. You might even call it a team sport. And making sure everyone has kind of that baseline, literacy, but also, people on the other end of the spectrum, people who are really savvy about this stuff. How do you make sure that all of those ends of the cybersecurity skills spectrum is being met with the workforce?
Yeah, so for us, we think about it in a multi-pronged way. So part of it is on us. We have to take accountability for how complex things are in IT and work to constantly reduce the cognitive load of end users, of developers, of system administrators, of anyone who's engaging in security. And I say that because security's hard. Like, say, catching a phishing email can be hard. Like, these people are good at what they do. And that's why these things happen. It's not because people are dumb. It's not because people are all gullible. It's not because people are have malicious intent. It's because it's hard. And if you're getting 500 emails a day and you're just like struggling to keep up, you're not being. Even if you were to add 5 seconds of more discernment to every email that came in, like you'd be constantly working and checking email. And so that's something that like we aim to take accountability for, how we sort of orient our environment to be empathetic of the cognitive load of end users. And then with respect to, and then I lead off with that because I think it informs where we target training and upskilling of individuals, because where we can't necessarily reduce the cognitive load, like that's where we want to focus on training. Like if we can like filter out all malicious attachments, for example. I don't want to train you on malicious attachment detection. Like, I want to focus our training on something else. And so our CIO actually is spearheaded this whole like workforce resilience program that we are fully behind. And that's really about upskilling people across a number of technical disciplines. So cybersecurity is one of them, product-oriented thinking and human-centered design is another, like embracing automation and like artificial intelligence, machine learning techniques and problem solving is another sort of swim lane in that. And it's really about trying to up-level our entire federal workforce so that we can more effectively engage the contractor support teams that we have in place, more effectively write requirements in, be more discerning around the kind of deliverables that are coming in and that we're being expected to review and be accountable for, that sort of thing. So for us, it's very multi-pronged, and and I think, like, generally speaking, the more engaging the training can be, the better. Like, if training is just kind of this ongoing active learning thing that happens, it's not like this big one-time event, like that's good. So like we do everything from like our entire security team, myself included, is like fully engaged on Slack and talking to people. And so we have, a lot of like article sharing and learning and stuff that happens that way. I could kind of bucket that in training in some way, because you're learning. We bring in industry guest speakers every month as part of our all hands to talk about everything from threat modeling to service mesh to, threat intelligence. And, those are shared out and transparent to anyone in security or CMS, not just my group. And then we have, the more structured, like instructor-led and computer-based training.
All right, very good. And Devon, as far as managing the workforce over at the US Mint, as far as upskilling the workforce at US Mint, where do you see the need? Where do you see the gaps, and how you're looking to ultimately fill those?
Yeah, I guess I'll break it into two different communities: the general population, Mint user. So we have traditional, annual training. We also do the phishing campaigns, and I think for us, it's what we're looking into is taking that phishing campaign and going up a level. And it really has to do with informing the user. So as they go through information, and then for people that may not quite, because it is getting tougher. And I mean, Rob makes some great points. The campaigns that we do and the ones that we see in the wild, it gets harder and harder. And the better we get, the better they do at crafting the emails to make them look more realistic. Perfect example, I got an email a week ago from my director on my personal email telling me to do something, right? And I'm having to look at it like, come on, this is not real. But imagine if I was a normal user. So making sure that users understand the techniques and procedures that may be out there, so they don't get consumed into a phishing campaign. So again, it's taking that actual campaign and then training the general population on here's what to look for. And we do that through all hands, just like Rob. But we're also looking to additional training we can give for the subset of users that may just be having a hard time really figuring out, even with the campaign, they may just need some additional upskilling to kind of inform them. Now to the traditional IT force, one of the things that I did was go through and look at the nice job categories and make sure everybody was properly categorized inside of the IT department. The next step is really taking that and making sure that we start to move out on role-based training, cybersecurity training for those individual roles, and start to help them better engage and better understanding their role when it comes to cybersecurity for that particular job sake. So that's something that's currently underway that I'm looking into, but I think that's really going to take us from a more reactive to hopefully more proactive when it comes to the training need of the environment. And then it's also assessing, I would say even in my division, is assessing the current staff and then finding out where they are. For some people, Mint's been around for a long time, and making sure that nobody's left behind. So as technology evolves, the staff is also getting additional training. and they involved with the training, they involved with the environment, they understand where we're going at, and they can help push us forward. So it's really three different ways: general population, traditional IT users, making sure we have that role-based training, and then my own staff, making sure they evolve as the technology evolves.
Excellent. So yeah, making sure all those bases are covered. I think it's time for poll question number 2. Alyssa, if you could throw that up on the screen. In your opinion, what is the biggest barrier to protecting against cyber attacks? Wow, that's that could be a lot of things here. So we'll give everyone a second. And single choice, just one thing to pick from this really robust list of a lot of threats here. Oh, you know what? I saw on the bottom here, hosts and panelists cannot vote. So we couldn't even do it if we wanted to, guys. So sorry about that. Bit of a mix, I'll say. And looks like tied for first here, unauthorized access and phishing, which you could really say are pretty dovetailed together, one and the same. All right. Well, that gives us a little bit of a snapshot here of what everyone's thinking about here. Robert, I would be terribly remiss based on your really cool background, the Bat Cave, and going back to what we were talking about previously with DevSecOps. Tell us a little bit more about the Bat Cave over at CMS and what it's all about and how it ties back to DevSecOps at the agency.
Yeah, so I mentioned the whole push for doing declarative state environments, and that's really what this is all about. It's us. And we're just getting off the ground doing this here, which is, like there's a lot of excitement here around this particular initiative, and it's so really the acronym here is for the cave part of this, but you need cool logos and everything to get people excited. So we're branding it as the continuous authorization and verification engine, and so I mentioned like pushing more stuff, state workflows, controls, all of that down into the code base, and doing so at the container orchestration, Kubernetes layer, at the pipeline, build and deployment pipelines, and then effectively, as you have all of that workflow sort of controlled in a code base, you can leave behind. So you're basically shifting left and shifting right at the same time, because you can leave behind really high fidelity runtime monitoring, state monitoring solutions in the running running environment, and build controls and such in at the shift left part of this equation. And if you have systems that are building and deploying software in this way, like CMS does a lot of custom application development, then really what we want to do is enable teams to deploy multiple times a day if they want. Not everyone's going to be ready for that. If they, some teams just don't work that way, or they may be slightly slower. But we don't want teams to have to go through a 2 to 4 week security impact analysis, another multi-month ATO process for changes that they want to make. They should be able to deploy iteratively, quickly, learn fast, fail fast, fail safe, and really just get code out to where it needs to be faster and safer. That's the whole nutshell that's the whole program in a nutshell.
Awesome. Well, the rollout couldn't be cooler. Speaking about the enthusiasm there, just in time for Halloween, the Bat Cave.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You can't see it right now, but I do have a full Batman suit behind me that was procured a few years ago when I was in San Francisco, that my wife still gives me a hard time about having.
Well, shame we don't get an opportunity to see that now, but wow, yeah, that's pretty nifty.
Lifestyle.
And Devon, as far as use cases, as far as things that the Mint's working on now, I think we were talking a little bit as far as the prep call before this about endpoint detection and response, and really kind of the imperative to automate that, right? There's just not enough humans at desktops to keep an eye on all the threats out there. I mean, it's got to be astronomical. And so, if you could maybe speak to that a little bit as far as the need to automate and how far the U.S. Mint is in that journey.
Yeah, I would say we're really close. When I got here at the Mint, we had a SOC, and one of the things that we did, at least one of the exercises, right back to understanding what's on your table today, is assessing all the tools. And one of the things that we and then I figured out very quickly is that we had a SOC, we really didn't have the tools. They really didn't have the tools that they needed to do to properly do that job and really be able to respond and remediate as quick as possible to cyber threats. So we started going on a journey of, hey, what's missing? EDR was one of those capabilities that were missing. So again, just with the acquisition process, we started to market research, plan, and now that we're, everybody's happy to be here. In FY22, we're very close to an acquisition to get a tool in play that really help our team to respond and recover, as well as feed those analytics back into our SIM about what's going on in real time. And to me, I think that's the biggest piece as we go out there and we try to discover threats, is that we're able to quickly go to one tool, understand exactly what's happening, assess it, and then follow that trail, follow those breadcrumbs back to that environment. And we're not spending hours to do it, we're spending minutes. I think we all kind of went through the SolarWinds journey. And one of the things that we experienced was that, hey, some of these tasks are taking us a lot of time to do, and this could be a lot more efficient. One of the terms that we used to have, at least in the Department of Defense, is that we can't people our way out of every problem. And what that meant to us is that we had to find software solutions that enabled our teams to be more efficient and not just bring in more people, bigger teams to solve a problem. And that's something I've taken over at Mint, is to not just people my way out of the problems, but actually look at software solutions that enable us to go as quick as possible and more efficient, and really start to create those plans to get us a little bit farther along our journey.
Excellent. And I think that's time for another poll question. Alyssa, do we have another one of those to throw to the audience? Yes, we do. In your opinion, how important is emerging technologies to help ensure agencies and their systems are protected against cyber attacks? And this is the last one, everyone, so make it count. And let's see what we got here as far as the results. I'm just not seeing them. Anyone else? Oh, there we go. Very important, 80%. Okay, pretty definitive there. Moving on. Another great question from the audience here. You guys are really killing it with the questions. Well done. As far as collaboration with other components within your agency, two big federated agencies, the Treasury Department and HHS. There's a lot going on, a lot of moving parts and pieces. How do you build those inroads, and how do you overcome those common security challenges?
Yeah, so in HHS we have a series of like working groups that are across the agency that encompass multiple operating divisions. We also do like monthly touch bases with we have a CISO council across the agency where all the operating divisions are in and participating and collaborating and such. Same thing happens at the CIO level, and then at the working groups is much more where we're getting contractors, staff, et cetera, sort of pitching in, rolling up their sleeves, working out problems, everything from how we're thinking about the tick to how we're doing zero trust to how we're handling software security and cloud security and all things in between.
Got it. And Devon, over at Treasury, how are things going with your other component agencies?
Yeah, I would say relationships are critical. Inside of Treasury, we have two forms. We have a monthly CISO huddle, and then we also have an internal security team. So where it's not just the CISOs, each team from every bureau that participates and gets updates on what's going on. We also have an internal group that we have that we're, text message group that we're able to communicate regularly to each other and ask those posing questions. Hey, I'm doing X, Y, Z. And it's critical to find out, hey, what are you doing over there? What kind of challenges have you faced? I would say I've been in Treasury for a year now, and communication has been great. I think with COVID, it's kind of forced us to be more intentional about that communication and having those set meet me points up to talk to each other and make sure that we're all on the same page and we understand what's going on. And as one bureau goes through a journey, to make sure that we're understanding what journey. I mean, perfect example, Zero Trust is a bureau that implemented it. I was able to set up a brief with that bureau, my bureau, to kind of discuss the implementation and the lessons learned that they went through. And that way, from a network operation standpoint, they could talk to network operation personnel at that bureau to understand exactly what kind of hurdles they went through. So again, relationships, communication, and being intentional about having those meet me points has been critical.
Got it. And, I'll circle back to the workforce piece of things. Seems to get a lot of attention here. Any thoughts on rotational programs that bring people in from industry for short stints? Will it be more helpful or more of a burden to train those folks who will just exit soon? Don't know if there's any thoughts there. I think that's an idea that's certainly been floated in a lot of different venues these days, but not sure how much is actually being taken into practice here.
Yeah, I can. I'm happy to address that. So, I mean, I'm a big proponent of this. I mean, like, consider the USDS. Like, stints are 2 years, for example. Like, if you, as an individual stepping into an organization, I mean, most people should be able to get something done of value in 2 years. And if you can't, like, literally can't add any value in 2 years, like, maybe you're not the right fit in that kind of organization, or maybe that organization's culture is not the right fit for you, or there's something not clicking there, because something should be able to move. And, you may not want to assign this massive project that's going to have a long tail of, O&M attached to it, where, longevity and, the individual, you'd want the individual to be there, sort of carrying over and sort of shepherding it through, like, day 2 to day 2000 operations. Like, that's important, but maybe not for everything. And so like, agencies using, like, leveraging the USDS or other sort of avenues to bring in folks to help move things along. Like, I'm in full support. The like, in the world that I'm most accustomed to outside of federal life, there's, and I don't necessarily, I think this is a little bit too aggressive, but there's a lot of people who are, in and out of jobs in, like, a year and a half. I'm in favor of it being longer than that, but, like, people are still, they're dropping into organizations, making value, and, like, things move forward. And of course, being in the business of the government, like, we are much more mission critical than, a startup doing a thing. But at the same time, if you just look at, like, organizational dynamics and people being able to do stuff to contribute to an organization's mission, like, I believe there can be I believe there can be a lot of value to be had there, personally, especially in the world of, like, fast moving technology.
Got it. Yeah, and real plug there to the U.S. Digital Service. Doing a lot of work across government, and soon to come the U.S. Digital Corps, doing, I think, a lot of the same work, but in a different way, perhaps. Devon, over at U.S. Mint, is that any light bulb moments as far as what USDS or perhaps any of its siblings might be able to do in terms of giving you guys a help in the directions you guys are going?
Yeah, we'll say definitely a fan. We haven't seen, at least at the Mint level, implementation of it, but definitely a fan. Like Robert, people coming in helping to move a problem forward. And in the part, I don't think that's an issue, at least at the Mint. We're also looking at interns coming in, and then again, they may come in and help move the ball forward and decide that commercial is really where they want to go. I think us, the federal government's opened up that mindset that people may come in and they may not stay forever. And it's great if you do, but if you come in for a year or two, it's also great if you help us move our journey forward and then you depart to go do something different. I think that's the mindset that needs to be changed, at least kind of communicated out to at least personnel as they look into coming into the federal government. They know, hey, there's opportunities. You don't have to stay forever. Come in and help us do some great work. And then if you want to move on, great. We're happy to help you there too. I think that's the mindset that's kind of shifting and changing, as well as just reaching out to other people that traditionally, maybe on the vendor side and decide, hey, look, I've been XYZ contractor for a year. I really want to come internally to help move the ball forward. Well, great. Come on in as well too. You don't have to stay forever as well. Come in, help out, move the journey forward, then go do whatever you want to next. I think that's kind of where the mindset is shifting, at least what I've seen at the Mint as well as other places.
100%.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And I think, kind of the other thread to all this is that, the idea of folks that stick around for, a 20, 30-year career in one agency or the federal service, writ large is less of a thing these days. And so, we all have to reconcile with that piece of it as well. Gentlemen, we're getting close to time here, and we have covered a lot of ground. Is there anything you guys want to bring up that I didn't think to ask you about yet, or to look at it another way? Is there anything you guys want to foot stomp, underline from what we've already talked about that people should really have as their key takeaway here?
You want to kick us off?
Yeah, I'll go first. I would say, and I would use the words as a cyber practitioner. So, and I'm sure there's a lot of those on this call. It's critical that we build confidence, that we instill confidence in leadership about what we do and how we do, and to make sure that we start to take the things that we do to behind the scenes and start being more, transparency is critical to me. It's critical to a lot of us to make sure we're transparent about how things are actually working, what things are not working, so that leadership understands what to invest in, what not to invest in. And again, Robin made a great point. We have a bunch of things. I'm sure there's a bunch of people on this call. They also have a bunch of things. It's critical that we understand what those things are, we properly utilize them, and then we're transparent about what's working and it's not working.
Yeah, I love that answer. I was going to say something along the lines of culture as well. I think there's so much talk about, and I'm certainly guilty of this, like talking about like overemphasizing on technology or just thinking about problems from a tech standpoint. And tech is important, policy is important, process is important, but the culture of your team, I think, it stands so far and above over everything else. And like I've worked with people like that antagonistic security person who just hates on everyone else, points fingers at everyone else, like doesn't want to take accountability for anything. And like what that does is it makes people not want to work with the security team. Like security is already in a position where it's a cost center and it's a bottleneck, and people are poised to like find ways to work around it. And if the security team's rude and abrasive and all of that, it just exacerbates that whole dynamic. And your mission as a security team is set so much farther back with a bad culture. And so I love Devon's point about transparency. Like we do OKR reviews every week. We share the results out to every single person in CMS should they want them. Same sort of dynamic for like our strategic planning, our all hands and all of that stuff. And it's the thing that I think I really want to drive home is like, you should be okay with like letting people peek behind the covers of like how you arrived at a risk decision, how things work, why you made the decisions that you made, all of that stuff. And in the interest of like extreme ownership and taking accountability for stuff, like you as a security team have to account for how complicated things are and how things turned out, and like seek to understand and embrace like your role in the way things are, or the way how things happen, and like embrace that kind of like blameless postmortem, open, like active learning mindset. Because if you do, you're going to build a much more inclusive, a much more bridge building sort of culture in security, and that's gonna help you. Even if your team doesn't have all the power and the control and the budget, and you're doing all the stuff, it's going to help you so much more than all of that.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, some great takeaways there. I wish we had more time. It always goes by so quickly, like I said in the beginning, but I think we're going to have to leave it here. But I do want to thank my panelists, Robert and Devon. Thanks again. Let's give them a virtual round of applause, if you will. And thank you to the audience for really being good with the questions. I wish we had more time to get to those, but it's been a great conversation, and thanks to all involved. Kirsten, back over to you.
Thank you, Jory, and thank you, panelists. Up next, we will be having our final tech talk for the day. This time, we get to hear from Jeff Frederick, the Managing Solutions Engineer over at Yubico. Jeff, please take it away.
I will. Let me get my slideshow going here, folks. Give me 1 second. Can everyone see that right now?
Looks good.
Great. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time today, folks. My name is Jeff Frederick, and I am the Solutions Engineering Manager for our public sector team. So I work very closely with our federal, state, and local customers, helping them deploy strong authentication solutions in their environments. So I'd like to speak with you today about modernizing the federal authentication landscape, specifically when you start looking at some of the modern services and solutions that we're now coming across in the federal market. So where are we today? Everyone knows that PIV and CAC are everywhere. So all federal employees, all DoD folks and contractors have that PIV card or that CAC. Great, wonderful, but that comes with a lot of challenges. So there's a huge cost and complexity involved in that PKI infrastructure that supports the PIV and the CAC. It's been around for 20 years, but it's very, very legacy. The smart card concept goes back to the 1970s. In addition, how do you handle folks who aren't eligible for PIV and CAC? Not everyone can get one, but they still need to access federal government resources and data and systems. Also, mobile devices. Have you ever tried to plug a PIV card into a mobile phone? Well, you have to have some kind of external PIV reader or some kind of case that you can slide a PIV card into. It's not fun, it's not easy, and it just causes a whole host of complications. And lastly, a lot of the new cloud services just don't support PKI, or the integration points to make that work are very complex and very difficult to integrate. And again, it doesn't provide a really, really great user experience. So what can we do about this problem? There's been a number of guidance documents over the years that really say, yes, we understand that the PKI and PIV and CAC infrastructure is not easy and it doesn't work in all places. So specifically, OMB Memo M1917 says it gives agencies and organizations the authority to pilot different types of authentication systems to fill those gaps in the PKI world. That's a major step forward in the government environment. And then just about the time the COVID pandemic hit, I think March or April of 2020, OMB released Memo M2019, which approves and allows for the issuance of these alternate strong credentials. And notice I said strong credentials. I don't mean OTP or SMS texts, but this memo allows for these strong credentials to be issued for the remote workforce. And specifically, it was in response to the COVID pandemic, but it also now still applies as we move forward. And then lastly, the White House released an executive order in May of this year that specifically mandates both the move to zero trust, which we'll talk about in a minute, and strong MFA. So no more SMS, no more OTP. Everything needs to be strong public-private key cryptographic MFA. So how do we solve this problem? Well, that's exactly what the YubiKey was designed for. The YubiKey is a small hardware token, as you can see by the picture, and it works on mobile devices, desktops, laptops, everything. But it's a FIPS 140-2 validated credential, so you can trust that strong cryptographic information that is on the key. It also supports the derived PIV and CAC solutions. So if your agency is currently using, say, Entrust Identity Enterprise for your mobile devices, or you're using a purebred credential from the Department of Defense, then those credentials can be provisioned directly to the YubiKey. It's supported today in support of this mission. DoD has also approved YubiKeys for use with both secret, classified, and unclassified information systems throughout all of DoD. And why is all this important, especially for mobile? Well, when you think about the PIV and the CAC, the whole reason, one of the main reasons they were created was to separate the authentication credential from the hardware device, computing device. So in the old days, you used to put a digital certificate on your Windows desktop and you would use that to authenticate. Well, the government realized that's really not secure. If your machine gets compromised, then that credential gets compromised. So just like, you know, we move that credential onto a separate device, the CAC or the PIV, the derived credentials on YubiKeys allows you to remove the phone or tablet or mobile device and take that credential off that mobile device and move it over to a hardware device that is much more secure. You don't have to leave it plugged in all the time. You only need to leave it plugged in when you want to authenticate. And then lastly, the YubiKey is multi-protocol. So we can support that smart card authentication that you use today. And we can also support the new FIDO technology, which is that modern looking technology that's now coming on board. So it'll work for you today, and it'll work for you in the future authentication mechanism. So it's future-proof. You know, we don't provide this thing that you can only use today. It'll continue to work when we move to some of these new protocols. So let's talk about FIDO2 for a minute. So what is FIDO2? It's what we call impersonation-resistant authentication. Very much similar to the CAC and the PIV. You can't impersonate an individual because it's this public, strong public key cryptographic solution. It was invented by Yubico, and we gave it to the FIDO Alliance to shepherd as an open standard. So anyone can build a solution that supports FIDO. So Microsoft with Azure AD is doing it, Google, Amazon, all of the major cloud services are building this technology into their infrastructure because it's simple and easy to build and implement and doesn't require a heavyweight architecture. And it's just as secure as the PIV or the CAC because it uses public-private key cryptography for authentication, but it doesn't require that very, very heavy and complex back-end PKI infrastructure. So it's easy to implement. You know, you can put a few lines of code into a web service to implement it. You can build an identity provider like Azure AD has done and implement that authentication on the back end. And here's another very important point for this is attestation. So when you get a PIV card, that card from the time it was built at the factory by the vendor till the time it gets into your hands as the end user has a trusted chain of custody, and credentials that are generated on that key or that card can be trusted because they're signed with a very secure cryptographic signature. And FIDO has the exact same concept. So what that means is, you know, we put an attestation cert on the key at the factory, and when you receive that key, that cert can be checked for authenticity. So you know that this was not only a device that came from Yubico, but it was also a device that your agency or organization purchased. And then every time, excuse me, every time an individual registers that key for a new service, that public-private key pair that is created is signed with that trusted certificate so that you know it was generated on the key and not imported. So that provides you that strong level of trust that when somebody presents their YubiKey with a credential, whether it's PKI or whether it's FIDO, you know that that credential can be trusted because it's a key that you recognize and a credential that you recognize. So that's very important in the zero trust world because you have no clue where these people are coming from and what their credentials are going to be. So you need to know for sure that that credential they're presenting is trusted and represents who they are. So again, we're here to help. If you guys have any questions, please go to our website listed here, yubico.com/federal. And you can see all the information about how we can help you modernize your authentication infrastructure. And we'll certainly contact you and walk you through all the steps and talk with you about other agencies that we're working with at the time and how we've solved their solutions. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you, Jeff. That was a great presentation. Up next, we will have our second panel of the day. And for this panel, I will be moderating. I would now like each of our panelists to please come on camera, and you can unmute yourself because we're about to do introductions. Before we begin, I just want to encourage the audience to please submit questions of your own in the Q&A section of this platform. We'll be sure to answer them throughout the discussion. And also remember to answer the poll questions as they come up in order to ensure that you receive your CPE credits. Now, with that being said, I would like each of the panelists to go ahead and introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about who you are, what agency you're with, and anything else you'd like our audience to know up top. So we will begin with Allison, please.
Hello, how is everyone today? Hi, Kristen. I'm Allison McCall. I'm the CIO at NTIS, which is an agency under the Department of Commerce. As a part of our mission, we team with private industry, joint venture partners, and help other government agencies in their initiatives, in particular in the areas of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and data in general. Thank you.
Thank you, Allison. And let's hear from Samuel next.
Hey, Kirsten, thank you so much for having me. I'm Sam Michael. I'm the CIO of NCATS, which is the National Center for Advancing Translational Sciences. We're one of the 27 institutes or centers, a part of the National Institutes of Health. Our mission is to actually get treatments to patients faster. And so we've done quite a bit of work during the COVID-19 pandemic, both for intramural research, which is internal to NIH, and extramural, which is our grantees. And as part of our initiatives, we are a very collaborative organization. Nearly every project we take on is collaborative. And so we build what I like to call secure collaborative scientific platforms, be they physical robotic systems in some cases, performing high throughput screening, which is involved in early stage drug discovery, to collaborative research environments. And we have a gigantic initiative called the National COVID Cohort Collaborative, or N3C, supporting 2,000 researchers from around the world. And so really appreciate being part of this panel, because security is at the forefront of everything we do, but also to try to make sure that we enable scientific collaboration.
Great, thank you so much, Sam. And then over to Chris.
Yeah, good morning. So my name is Chris Kaler. I am the Chief Information Security Officer for the Office of Surface Mining, Reclamation, and Enforcement, which is a sub-agency under the Department of Interior. I've been with Department of Interior. I worked at the department level for about 15 years, directly for the CISO, doing strategic planning, human capital, and other portfolio management activities, and recently moved to this job about a year and a half ago. And I'm excited about the opportunities that the changes in where security, I think, is going to go in the future. And so I'm looking forward to the discussion about Zero Trust.
Thank you. And let's hear from Joe.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, my background, I was in the military for Air Force for several years, and then got out, joined a government agency. Did that briefly, had my own company for a period of time, and then I was at IBM for 25 years, their security CTO. And this year I joined ARMIS. And ARMIS is focused on managed and unmanaged devices, as a SaaS. So I'm very, very excited, and I have been doing Zero Trust since before the Zero Trust word was coined. Anyway, happy to be here today.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
And I very much liked the fish tank. I got to say, that was awesome.
I was thinking that too. Great. So the topic of today's panel is embracing a zero trust security model. Allison, let's start with you. Can you please break it down for our audience? What is zero trust security, and what importance does it hold for the federal government?
Okay. Zero trust has been out there for a long time, and the main principle of it is to examine the trust level for access to systems, to devices, to any technology. we look at it now as an architecture. It's not just a buzzword. It's something all encompassing. It relates to all of IT, and it's a model and an architecture, a way of looking at how to protect what you have, protect the access, so that only those with the need to know, and I don't mean in the classified sense, but in all sense, have access to that, again, that architecture, that piece of IT equipment.
Thank you. And Sam, what importance do you feel that zero trust holds for the federal government?
Yeah, I think it's incredibly important given just the nature of the world we're in and the modernization. And I think obviously now with the advent and the realization of the power of cloud computing, it's more important than ever. I think it was interesting, even the presentation before this panel, a lot of what it comes down to when I think about this problem is the identity. And not just the identity of people, but the identity of devices, because who needs access to your network? Why do they need access, and what do they need access to? And it's particularly, important to us at NCATS because as we, really focus on collaborative environments. And I think it is important, the term zero trust means not to trust, right? Which is also, one of the principles behind federated networks, right? If it's federated, the inherent is a lack of trust. But it's important to the government as we are delivering more services to more customers, both internal and external as well. So, and also another thing to keep in mind, and part of the reason I was excited about this panel and this discussion was how do we prevent zero trust from becoming debilitating? Because that's just a key aspect to us, because in many cases we deal, in particular on the NIH side, as we deal with many academic groups where they really are behind in some cases from a security perspective, and they're used to a level of freedom that we can't quite provide. So it's really how do we strike that balance of what we absolutely need to adopt a zero trust approach, but do it in a fashion such that the implementation doesn't strangle all of the work we're trying to do.
Well, and that brings me to my next question too. For Chris, maybe you can help. What can be done to address the zero trust architecture?
Well, I think I have probably a little different take than a lot of people do on this, but I think it's a paradigm shift. This is going to take a lot of work. It's not something we can fully implement today. And I think the NIST and DOD and CISA directions out there and maturity models show that we're just at the beginning of this journey. We have a long road ahead of us, and I equate the zero trust as the paradigm shift that we had, say, from mainframe computing years and years ago to the internet, where physical security was the primary approach, and we had to move to distributed security of an internet. So when we shift in zero trust, we're at the starting point. There are technologies out there that we can implement that are pieces of that, but there's a lot of development of new technology, new protocols that need to be done. So I think it's a measured approach, and we need to understand that the vision is long-term, not short-term.
Joe, I see you came off mute. Were you going to add anything to those questions?
No, I agree with Chris's point about it's more than just users, it's the devices as well. So you need to authenticate, the devices, and that could be, the laptop, the mobile phone. It could even be your security cameras and all the different sensors. There's an explosion going on now of IoT devices. There's actually more IoT devices now than there are servers and workstations. And that trend, another paradigm shift. It's like, we went from castle moat to cloud, and now we have this explosion going on and sensors and IoT devices. So
thank you. Sam, go for it.
Yeah, no, just want to follow what Joe was saying, because that's impacting us. And this gets back to, I agree completely with Chris talking about the paradigm shift at all levels, including the vendors, right? Because when Joe mentions IoT, A lot of that, the backbone is the MQTT transport protocol, and essentially no security is included in that at all, right? And again, at the time, that sounded great because you want to quickly connect devices, or even folks, again, using in their wireless and their home systems, Zigbee communication. So we're almost trying to retrofit this model onto a lot of appliances and devices that were designed and just thrown out to the market with no inherent security. Now that's since changing over time, which is fantastic, but that's really impacting us in the laboratory space, because in many cases, if you talk about laboratory instrumentation, which has been absolutely critical during the pandemic, both for diagnostics, testing, further experimentation, in many cases, they're dealing with a computational infrastructure, which in some is over a decade old, and security is essentially an afterthought. So part of what I'm really excited about this paradigm shift is, it's going to take everyone, including the vendors and including these potential standards of how we're communicating, but really do completely agree with Joe's perspective on the IoT piece. That's really impacting us in the laboratory space right now. And especially if we're a government lab trying to adhere, I just can't roll out and get asked for 100 waivers for every piece of equipment in my laboratory. We have to have some systemic approach to how we can introduce zero trust into our environment.
Well, thank you for sharing that. We do have one audience question that just came through. How are you developing these zero trust skills of your workforce? That's an interesting question. Allison, do you have any thoughts around that?
I do. One interesting aspect of zero trust is it's not just a cybersecurity type of role. You really, in order for the planners, the implementers to really get it right, they need to have a background in software development and networking and system admin. And so you really need people with diverse skills. Otherwise, we might miss something. It's not merely a security role. So how to train for that, I think I'm certain there's some training out there now, but one thing to do is to look at the NIST guidance, in particular, the technical guidance, start with that, look at some of the industry white papers that are out there, and kind of really get your head around the issue. This is not something that you can just jump in and do. You really have to plan first.
Certainly. And Joe, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add an earlier question that I wanted to comment on, and it was regarding how decisions are made on who gets access to what. Back not that long ago, like 10 years ago, like in the ICAM kind of space, it was just based on roles. And what is a role? Role is a static group in an LDAP directory somewhere. And then the question is, does the business know or the agency know what roles a user needs to perform their job? Oftentimes they don't. So they tend to give the user whatever John has over there. So because John can do his job, so therefore I'll give it to the new person. And it's all static. And so there's really not and what zero trust is trying to do is say, okay, now we're gonna make runtime decisions on what you should get access to. So I think there's technology aspect to it too, but there's also a business aspect. Does the businesses know at a detailed level what a user needs to do to perform their job? And then additionally, we have devices that are coming on, and we need to apply the same logic to the devices. Does the device need to be on this corporate network, or should this device be on a different network? And then are the devices like CDM? It's focused on managed devices like laptops and so forth, and it really good. It brings in the Tenables and the CrowdStrike from the EDR perspective, making sure the devices, the laptop is configured and patched correctly, and then you have the remediation coming in there. We need to provide that same model to the unmanaged devices. So it should be a holistic approach. Both managed devices and unmanaged devices. You should be able to say, what are the risks for my business, and from a risk from a managed device and from an unmanaged device. I think so. I think CDM. I've done a lot of work with CDM through the years, and it's a great program. And I think it needs to also include unmanaged devices into that, because that's a new attack vector. Your cyber attacks now are targeting those devices because they're not managed, and they may or may not have vulnerabilities. So that's a new attack vector that we need to close.
Great, thank you. And another audience question just came in that he said, you brought up that zero trust is not new. How are you helping to bridge old buzzwords to the new paradigm like zero trust is to the Rainbow series of books?
I can
Go ahead.
I can take a stab at it. No, I think it's a great question, Darren. I think that, again, that happens in technology all the time. Even, mentioning IoT, if you've worked in industrial processes, this is, supervisor control and data acquisition. This is SCADA. These are principles from the 80s with PLCs, but now a PLC isn't just in your factory. Your PLC is essentially around the world, right? So, it's a problem of scaling. I think, how we can bridge these is what is the potential implementation strategy. And this gets back to the training, and Allison was mentioning this. I think the way we bridge some of these gaps are for people to understand the underlying and fundamental technology, and I think that's an important piece about this. And let's be real, the technology stack has just gotten more and more complex. The full stack developer I was looking for 10 years ago was not the full stack developer I'm looking for today. As a matter of fact, again, many folks have implemented DevSecOps into their operations, and we have to expand beyond that. So I always take this as, the buzzwords come and go when it's a marketing, right? Everyone's selling their zero trust product. It's the same product they were trying to sell us 10 years ago. I'm not knocking them, right? They're going to go where the buzzwords are. It's making sure you have that baseline and fundamental understanding of the technology, and then how you can actually implement that across your organization. And it's not easy. I mean, let's be real. Again, the technology skills required are just getting more and more complex. And I think that is important. The educational, the training question, to me, is actually the question of this entire concept is, will we be able to train and have enough technically proficient staff that we can actually introduce into the government workforce, or just in general? That's what I really see as a rate limiting step at our organization, and so what can we do to actually help teach those principles as we're introducing new people into the workforce?
Fantastic insights. Thank you. We'll take a break right now from questions, and we'll go ahead and pop up our first poll today. So please answer this if you're at home and you want to receive your CPE credit. The first one that will come up on the screen shortly, I'll go ahead and read it. In your opinion, how important are emerging technologies to the future of implementing zero trust security within the federal government? I still don't see the poll. Let's give it another second here. Okay, well, we'll just skip that for right now. Maybe there's some technical difficulties. How ironic, right? But we'll go back to that. Moving on to our next question.
I just wanted to comment on the last question. And I think around training and stuff. And I think cloud, the FedRAMP process, I think it has potential to help manage that problem, in that, we're now, instead of the customers having to install technology in their environment and all the complexity that goes along with that, now, the vendors were providing SaaS services, and that, granted, they have to go through the FedRAMP process, but what that provides for the agencies is the complexity of installing now is alleviated. And also another major problem was migration. So the vendor came out with version 1, a new version 2 came out, then you had to just and the migration was not an easy task back in 5 or 10 years ago. It was on site. It was that's all being managed now through the SaaS service. So that's helping, I think, manage some of the complexity. There's still complexity you have to deal with, but some of the housekeeping, if you will, is being provided, as the vendors start providing SaaS services.
Thank you for that. As for our poll questions, folks on the back end controlling that, please just go ahead and pop them up. I won't call for them when they're ready. Just go ahead and put them up. But moving on, I would like to hear from Chris. Chris, what are the best strategies for implementing a security model, as well as getting the most out of that security model? Could you please explain your experience with that?
Well, I mean, in the context of zero trust, I think, again, it's a new approach, and the hardest thing to do is to get everybody on board with the approach, right? So, and given that it's a new way of thinking, there's a lot of old cultural cultural challenges that have to be overcome. The concept that it's about my system and I gotta create a boundary around that. And to me, it's about the data, right? And that is a very hard thing for a lot of professionals to get past, is that this is about protecting the data, and it's data centric versus a boundary around a series of systems or a collection of systems, a network perimeter. So, you really have to start with the socialization and education part of somebody that can actually be in a position to champion the change. And it's hard. It's as we all know, cultural changes is the hardest thing you can do in an organization. And when people have been doing this for sometimes, like me, 15, 20 years, it's hard to change that cultural mindset. So I think that's the challenge, is get somebody who's passionate about it, somebody who is in a position where they can champion it. Because we're never going to have the resources to work the way we are now in a reactive mode. I mean, it's the whack-a-mole, chase something around when you find it. And zero trust has the potential to become the proactive approach to prevent those from ever happening.
Yeah, no, that's super insightful. Anyone else on the panel would like to share some of their strategies that may be different? Go ahead, Sam.
I just want to second what Chris is saying, especially, for mature organizations. We've been around now in different iterations. We were formally made a center in December 23rd, 2011. So we're celebrating our 10th year, but we were around a little bit before then. It's that organizational change is a huge challenge. And so then the question is, how you garner that support. I think the champions matter. And I think what Chris is also saying is the importance that the organization needs to embrace it, across the board. Otherwise, you're not going to be successful. And it is very difficult to do. I mean, especially if you're supporting legacy systems. There's this, folks are familiar with Salvador Dali, his work, the melting clock painting. It's actually called The Persistence of Memory is the name of that painting. And that, to me, I use as an example where it's just incredible how powerful the persistence of memory of what things were can prevent what things could or should be, and so how do you get that activation energy to get people to think about this in a different way? So it really just takes concerted effort, but also, learning is a process of repetition. Just stay on point and really make sure that you're constantly taking every opportunity to present on this, even if it's exhausting, right? Because, you're gonna get tired of hearing yourself speak, but without that reinforcement, you just have very little chance of success.
Thank you. Joe, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to say I talked to many different federal customers, and I think there's a lot of confusion out there around zero trust. And because you have zero trust, you have the TIC 3.0 program, you have CDM, and all this is like merging together. And prior to that, it was like TIC 2.0 is a very structured program, and with TIC 3.0, it's more like a menu or an a la carte. And so a lot of agencies that are out there, they want to buy zero trust. Not like several panel members have said that zero trust is an approach. Nothing you can buy and employ. So it is confusing from the agency's perspective, because how they start. And I would sort of subscribe or recommend starting at, well, different agencies are going to have different priorities. But it's got to be secure, so you got to build Maslow's, hierarchy. You got to build your shelter and food. You got to get the core secure, and then build on it. Anyway, that'd be my recommendation.
Allison, did you want to add anything?
Yes, I totally agree with what everyone has said regarding this, but it is, where to start is different in every agency. It depends on the number of legacy apps you have, what your environment is. Are you already in the cloud? Are you on-prem? Are you hybrid? And really knowing where to start is part of the planning process. I don't think there's a set recipe that will work for everyone. For some of us, starting with building building zero trust into the new initiatives would be the best approach. For others, it would be, starting in other parts. So I think that some of it is determining what's right in terms of your mission, in terms of what you have, and again, the skill set of your employees.
Mhm.
And your budget, because if you have to buy tools or whatever and you have budget limitations, that could be a concern, and you may need to make some budgetary requests a year or two in advance.
Yeah, well, that leads me to my next question, actually, and I'll turn it over to Chris for this one. But what's the biggest barrier to implementing zero trust? Is it lack of clarity? Is it the budgetary constraints, like Allison mentioned? Commitment to ongoing administration? Like, what are some of the bigger challenges?
Well, I think technology is the biggest barrier right now. I don't think there is. I think there's some technologies out there, and I apologies to all the vendors that are on the call currently, but zero trust is a sales pitch. Everybody who wants to sell in the federal government is going to spin that their product is doing zero trust. And some of those are part of zero trust architecture, software defined networking, role-based access control, but it's not, there's not one technology out there that or vendor that's going to provide zero trust. There are things to be developed, much when we went from mainframe computing to internet. I mean, we didn't have firewalls. We didn't, there were HTTP protocols. HTTPS is the future of the security side of it. And those were all developed over time. And I think there's the need to develop technology, and that's where I think everybody has an opportunity to lead in this. It's not a one place solution. It's and I'll just give a quick example. That credential that may be used, say, in a Starbucks cafe or on a federal site, is not a black and white credential. It's not trusted or untrusted, right? Depending on what it is. It's depending, right? It's not black white. It's shades of gray, right? What might be 100% okay on a federal side in a federal network, in a managed network, won't be okay, maybe say in Starbucks, or it might be, but then what happens if that credentials used overseas? That changes what that credentials trust level is, and that nobody out there is doing stuff like that. And that's just one element that has to be accounted for, say, in a protocol when you start talking across a holistic, a chained set of environments like we've talked about. The devices, the software on a system, the credentials, the networks that you're traversing, time of day. I disagree a little bit with Joe. I think role-based is important. It's just we don't understand, as he pointed out, our roles. They should be absolutely critical, because the role of an administrator should be completely different than the role of a data admin or a data analyst. So I think roles are absolutely important.
Chris, I just wanted to jump in. I totally agree. I've done identity management for 30 years. It's critical. I don't think a lot of customers have a good handle on the people in it. I call it polluted, meaning that it's not, and I think it needs to be dynamic. It's just, unfortunately, they're making decisions based on roles, and also they support I don't want to get too technical, they support nested groups. And oftentimes they will unintentionally allow somebody to get access to something they're not aware of. So they've lost control of it, I think.
All right. Well, thank you, gentlemen. And Armis is in our Zero Trust Lab, so they will be demoing for us later on in the upcoming months. So that'll be definitely interesting, something to look out for. So I think we spoke about this a little bit, but let's dive deeper in a little bit. Just like, where do you start? Like, where have you started? What would you recommend to other folks who have not yet started? Sam, do you want to take that one first?
Yeah, I think it's system specific, right? I mean, so part of it, we did talk about the organizational and trying to adopt it, and then where, from a where to start perspective is if you have a system that's new, in my cases, I always think it's easier to start fresh, versus adopting something from a legacy. And then, I think I believe it was Joe said something really, really important with regards to what is a boundary anymore, because that's something, again, that's always required. But in some cases, they don't necessarily exist, and so, but also to the point Chris was making is, where do you start with a particular system, and then what is the data? Because ultimately, again, all of this is data driven. What is the data that is of value? Because again, that's what people are. I mean, there's people that are malicious actors try to shut things down, but the reality is, what are they going for? In many cases, it is the data, right? So when we try to start these approaches and with new systems, we try to have security and the zero trust, methodology integrated from the very start. Even if it comes down to, I'm going to ensure that the data has access control at the row level of a table, essentially, and then how do I propagate that all the way through, ultimately, so a collaborative researcher, potentially who's residing overseas, because again, these are the kind of environments we support. How do we ensure that that researcher only has access to that particular data? So not to get too in the weeds with it, but what I would propose is give yourself a pilot project. I mean, this also touches, I think Allison actually said the key limitation, or one of the, is budget. Let's be real. At the end of the day, there's no dollar amount you can put on security. I mean, look at NSA. They have billions of dollars in budget. They've had several breaches over the years, and it's not a knock on them. It's like I tell that to my leadership all the time. The maximum spend I have in security is infinity, right? I can spend all the money in the world and it's not ensuring me security. The question is, what is the budget you have? And then where do you want to allocate it? So I always like starting with pilot projects in a very limited scale. And then once you have success with those, how can you adopt that potentially with legacy systems? That's my approach, because again, legacy systems sometimes are very tricky, because they involve multiple steps and you don't want to impact work that's already happening. That's just the take that we adopt, when we're rolling these systems out with a zero trust model.
Fantastic, thank you. Allison, is your approach somewhat similar, or do you have any different insights?
I think it is similar. One thing that's rather important is that we need to start incorporating zero trust into our statements of work for new development, if we are building a system from scratch. And also, as we're procuring, if we're procuring a cloud-based software as a service or anything like that, to make sure that there are that the zero trust is built in, and not just a buzzword, but really part of the architecture what we're buying. So that's where I'd start. In my case, I probably would start with new procurements, with new initiatives. I think the legacy is going to be a bit harder, but it depends on your mission. If you have a mission-centric system, it's very important. You may want to start on that and put your resources toward zero trust for that system. So every organization is different.
Joe, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to answer it from a vendor perspective, and so when we talk to our federal customers, a lot of them are resistant to our concern. If I better say, like you said, budget. A new solution is going to require people and skilled people to manage it, and all the challenges that we all know that has, and then the deployment of it. So again, coming from a SaaS perspective, where it's already pre-built, you have to comply with FedRAMP. So that alleviates a lot of problems. Also, someone, I think it was Chris, had mentioned at one point in time scanning, and a lot of systems don't like to be scanned. I've done a lot with mainframe, and mainframes are devices. They don't like being scanned. There are other systems that don't like to be scanned either. So there are some challenges. Everyone wants to scan for vulnerability. So the approach that Armis takes is that we want to discover all devices, both managed devices and unmanaged devices. And we do that by integrating with different vendors out there. We have network taps and other approaches. We identify vulnerabilities across managed and unmanaged devices. And then we want to automate policy enforcement. So should this unmanaged device be on the network or not? And we do that without scanning. To address some of the concerns of scanning and agentless. So the idea would be that they can get the technology and get value from it in a very rapid time. They don't have to install anything. We connect into what we call collectors, to get the PCAP and the other devices, and then no agents have to deploy. So a lot of the challenges deploying technology has been around installing and deploying agents. I mean, everyone probably has horror stories of deploying agents, and then how many agents are out there on the workstation. You start having 10 or 15 different agents out there, and that way the customer can get value quickly. So.
Thank you. Chris, maybe you can take this audience question. What is your agency doing to encourage the enterprise architecture groups to help bake in the concepts behind Zero Trust?
Well, again, I think leadership from the top is a big part, right? If you don't say it's a priority, we all, at least ways I know in my organization, we love to go chase the next shiny object, right? And in security, there's always a fire, right? And once you get one of my problems that I've seen over the years is, especially if we have a multi-phase approach, we'll do phase one and then it's off to something else, right? So you gotta, again, I think you have to find somebody who's passionate about it, that will ensure that as things are developed and architectures are built, that somebody is willing to say, no, we got to do this. This isn't something we can just say, check the block and we're off to the next thing, right? Again, it's a long-term thing. It has to be baked into your strategies. It has to be, forced into your architectures by leadership to say, this isn't a simple check the block, we're done because we bought a product, right? It's again, it's a paradigm shift, and it's that's to me the critical part of this is long-term strategies that then drive the architectures.
Fantastic, thank you. Did any of the other panelists want to weigh in, Sam?
Yeah, I actually think it's a fantastic question to add to what Chris is saying. I take this also another step, and this is actually relates to the comment Joe was making regarding agents. I cannot agree more in the difficulty of deploying, but I think a lot of it also comes down to working with the teams to show that you want to work with them, right? You don't want to debilitate them, you don't want to stop them, you want to enable them. And I think that's a key aspect, is really making sure that the user and the groups themselves feel enabled, and that, again, your answer isn't just to say no. Your answer is to say, okay, how can we work with you and help get where you need to go? And that helps establish that trust and communication. And the reason it also ties to agents in some regards is, there's no amount of agents out there. At one point, it was a running joke is we would buy our new laptops with refreshes. I spend $2,500 per machine, and I install so many agents, it essentially becomes a brick, and I immediately hear my new machine is terrible, right? And it's like, who are we really serving there? Is we have to be very cognizant ultimately of the user and the customer's needs. And I think if you really show that you want to work with them and you're trying to make sure that they're going to have a good experience through this, that adoption will come. I think that's a real aspect, to add on to what Chris said, is just really establishing that trust with the users, and in addition to, the support from the leadership, obviously.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Joe, were you going to add to that?
Yeah, I was going to say, again, everyone said it, there's a lot of confusion around Zero Trust. I think what ATARC is doing with this lab is a good idea, because a lot of the agencies, well, again, what is Zero Trust? So again, it's the whole, it's like TIC 3.0 is more like a menu a la carte kind of approach. And the agencies are being asked to do Zero Trust, the executive order and so forth, but they're not for sure what they need to do. So I think the ATARC and what we're doing here with some of these, multiple vendors participating and the Zero Trust will give some guidance, to them. Because if you talk to 10 different experts, you're going to get 10 different definitions of what it is.
Yeah, definitely. Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, so just a comment. So I mean, the discussion about agents is kind of, to me, the perfect example. Why are we putting agents on systems? Because we want to detect something that's happened after the fact. The whole point of Zero Trust to me is prevent it from happening in the first place. I don't need an agent on there if I have established the trust posture of that device, right? And I would argue going and finding vulnerabilities, and no offense again, Joe, but detecting what's on the network, and to then determine if it's vulnerable or not, again, part of zero trust should be I should already be able to assign a trust value based on a known state of those devices or the system, so that I know what the trust level of that device is. And that's another element that's taken into, again, not a black and white decision on trust. It's what is the level of trust of the whole chain of events from the time the user decides they want to log on? Is it 3 o'clock in the morning and they're not supposed to be on at 3 o'clock in the morning? That's the first question, right? Are they even supposed to be doing that? And that establishes the first part of the chain as far as so time, locality, geolocation, what environment are they in? So, I mean, you're not going to just discover across the entire internet what's in that chain across there. So again, this is a different way of thinking in my, and I haven't really seen a vendor that really has understood the whole beginning to end discussion of what zero trust really is, because it should be a holistic algorithm of every element from the time that user decides they need to do something to the time that they actually get to the data.
No, and Chris, all your points are, I agree with you. At the same time, I would say that CDM addresses a lot of this, and in order, there's 0-day attacks, which no one's prepared for, but that only happens, and the next day everyone comes out with a patch. So what the challenge is the systems that are out there, be it managed systems or unmanaged, are they properly patched? So I mean, and you'll find out, and I do a lot on DoD as well, and oftentimes a lot of the attack vectors are known exploits that have been out there for longer than anyone wants to admit, years in some cases. So what that means is the machines aren't remediated. So and that's where the agents come in, the Tenables of the Taniums and all the other EDR solutions. They are trying to detect that, and then you come in with your remediation software, whatever you use. And I sometimes that is not as tight. That's the problem out there. And that's what I'm trying to say is I agree with your point. Ideally, you'd want to be where 0-day comes out, things are automatically patched. That's not the state of today. And that's even further exacerbated on unmanaged devices, because unmanaged devices, you have devices that are made by some company, again, a security camera or a printer or all kind of HVAC system, and they go out of business. And that system is running some embedded version of Linux that is from 2016 and is not patched. And more importantly, no one knows it's not patched. So, and that's where Armis, we're trying to, especially around, you get into this whole concept of building managing it. So it's more than just, I think we're looking too narrow. We're looking at servers and workstations. We're not even looking at the whole building as a whole.
Yeah, and I guess my point is, in my concept, there'd be a protocol that when that 0-day hits, what the posture of all your systems are, and you simply say what the trust level of that system is now changed, right? And you go from a maybe 100% trust of the environment, and my thought is in this concept is when the user logs on with a certain role, the environment is built around that role. Why do we have sysadmins who have access to the data analyst tools and the data? Why do we have data analysts who have access to the system admin tools, right? When I log on with a certain role, I should build that environment. What software is allowed based on that role? And then, and it does, it's going to take everybody to stop and think and actually understand what their roles are in their organization is based around that data, and build that environment. Can I allow a data analyst that now that there's a 0-day on, and the trust level of that environment's gone down, right? Maybe if it's on a federal network or a trusted network that you can control the access to it, lateral movement. Why do I allow my network on my system to go every which way, right? When I connect to a certain system, why don't I lock that down and say, you can't go anywhere else, nothing else can come in, you go only to the job you need to do.
Great. I think a personal point I have is VPN. So if you look at a VPN, How does it work today? You VPN into the entire network. So from a zero trust perspective, now there are solutions of that where it's like a point to point, which is, you're authorized for that application and you don't see the entire network. So I think zero trust is we're just starting. I think it's a long journey. I think we're just starting.
I see Allison has a comment.
Yes, I'll just quickly. One thing I want to say is I think there may be a place for customized artificial intelligence. I think there will be, security tools that we use that we can customize for our needs. But I think in some environments, we may need to do some on-the-fly analysis to really get the answers that we're looking for. And again, it depends on the mission. It depends, some government agencies have a very standard environment, are very static, and then others are constantly dynamic. And it's those that are very dynamic that I think will need some customized solutions.
Great, thank you. And Sam?
Yeah, I just want to follow on something that Joe said. I agree completely, especially with regards to the way what we even consider a device, right? Between the power of compute and what it's being deployed into, and his example that he gave about, you may have some device or the building itself is running some Siemens automation system, who knows? And there's some relay device which has, some version of Ubuntu no one's aware of. But again, it's just, so a lot of this comes down to, in my mind, the device level. And that was a question, I believe it was Stephen or someone asked about the approach that Windows is taking with TPM 2.0 for Windows 11. I think it's a fantastic move. I really like the approach that Microsoft is taking there. And even the IoT front, they're doing good work on the Azure Sphere side. One comment I did want to say, because I know we're running out of time, but something gets back to the education factor. I think now that you're a vendor, I think this is where the education piece just comes in so important. And again, most of the federal folks in this call, I have to imagine, are just inundated with sales calls, inundated with emails, inundated with also, and that just the information is just overwhelming, and this also ties back to where do you start? And I view part of this is, have a resource where you can be educated on what it is, what approaches to take, what exists, and where the gaps are. But if there's anything I would say for the vendors, that are part of this, is help the federal employees and help the federal government understand zero trust and the approaches, because we are just swimming in a sea of endless email. I can almost imagine how many emails people got on this call on the federal side during this call. It's just an endless stream. And not to knock you, Joe, right? You guys, everyone has to eat, but it is just ramping up. It's just the number of emails we receive, almost especially in the era of COVID, everyone's sitting at home working remotely. People have time to send out more spam emails. Help educate the customer, because I think it's really needed.
All right, thank you. We see we have one more audience question real quick. Chris, I know you're taking it, but maybe you want to answer it out loud. How zero trust will impact employees?
Yeah, so what I was basically starting to say in typing, and I did answer another one too, but the one that I answered in text was about 100% trust. And I'm like, I don't think in the conceptual model that I have in my head, right, that you will ever have 100% trust. To Joe's point, there may be a vulnerability out there that suddenly pops up and now your trust level changes, right? So to this about how does it impact employees? In the ideal world, it should be completely transparent, because if you're doing what you're supposed to do within the parameters of what you're allowed to do, accessing the data that's part of your job, it should be completely transparent. There is, it's just like it. When you go to a website that has security, TLS, whatever, it's transparent to you, right? Zero trust should be the exact same way, right? When it's fully implemented, it should be completely transparent. And I know he asked about AI in here, and that to me is one of my biggest problems, and kind of agrees with Joe on his vulnerability in 0 days. We're never going to have enough resources to play reactive approaches, because the AI is finding things faster in code than we can ever react to it. And so we have to change. I saw a survey out there that they estimated there was going to be a shortage of cybersecurity professionals in the United States alone. In the next 5 years, there was going to be a need for 300,000 to 400,000 cybersecurity professionals in the United States alone. That's not even talking the IT people. There is no way we will grow that many people.
Well, thank you for such an insightful discussion. We're coming up on time, actually. In 30 seconds or less, are there any final thoughts? We can go around what you want to leave our audience with. Allison, would you like to wrap it up for us?
I think this is a great group, a great discussion. I'm really pleased with, some of the comments have been made. I think everyone here has a lot of insight into the problem, and we welcome more of these discussions, and including with industry.
Thank you. And then Sam, how about you?
Yeah, similar, just a really great discussion, great to get different perspectives, and thanks everyone from attending, but also, just final points of just help us with the education front, because we need it at all levels of the organization. So thanks for having me.
Great, thank you. And Chris, what would you like to leave our audience with?
Yeah, well, again, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity. I think this is important. Obviously, I'm passionate about my thoughts on zero trust, and I apologize to Joe. I hope I didn't offend him too much. And any other vendor out there. I just think, I talk about those champions, and I think, someday I hope to be, in a position to be able to champion that. And because I do think it's important. I don't think our current model is sustainable. And it's just, so I do appreciate the opportunity to come in and share my thoughts.
Thank you. We loved having you. And Joe, how about you?
Yeah, no, I thank you very much for having me. And Chris, it's a great discussion. It's really a pleasure to talk with. I learned some from these panels myself. So, it's always nice to talk to somebody else. You get a different viewpoint, and things are far from perfect. Last thing I would say from an ARMIS perspective is I like the comment around AI. So we use an AI engine. That's how we're able to identify these, especially the unmanaged devices, and look forward to talking with them if they have any follow-on questions.
Great, thank you. And Jerry Caron plugged this for us in his keynote, but again, we're starting our vendor demonstrations this Friday. So please join them. You can go to our website to learn more, but ultimately just reach out to me and I can add you to those meetings. They're open to the public. You definitely want to, see what the art of the possible is within this lab, and ARMIS will be presenting at a later date as well. So that being said, we are out of time. I want to thank our panelists, of course, and you all at home. Such great questions that came in. Thanks again to our partners at Aqua Security, Tripwire, Yubico, and ARMIS. And I hope everyone has a great rest of your day, and we look forward to seeing you at the next event. So thank you and take care, everyone.